6 o'clock. I know folks will still be joining us over the next probably 5 or 10 minutes or so, but I know we are mindful of everyone's time, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second community workshop for the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project in Pacifica. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, and I'm sending well wishes to everyone and hope everyone is staying healthy. I'm Kelsey Regani with Kearns & West. We're a facilitation and stakeholder engagement firm, so I'll be helping to facilitate our workshop tonight. First things first, I wanted to note that this meeting will be recorded. I think we'll hit record any moment now, and will be posted to the website after the meeting. So if folks who are not able to attend want to check out the video afterwards, they're able to do so. And same for all of you, if you cannot stay for the whole meeting but want to check back in later, listen to the rest of the recording, that will be made available. Next up, I'd like to open it up for a few opening remarks from Councilmember Beer and Mayor Pro Tem Sue Beckmeyer. So I think Councilmember Beer, you might be up first.
I am up first. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Kelsey. And welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see, well, I can't see you, but I know you're here because I can see your name. So welcome tonight to the second community meeting for the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project. You know, I really want to thank Ryan Marquez, who's our associate civil engineer, and his entire team. I had the opportunity to be on the ad hoc subcommittee, so I got to see firsthand the professionalism and the effectiveness of this group. So I want to thank them very, very much. And I look forward to all that's going to come of this project. And I'm just going to turn it right over to Mayor Pro Tem Sue Beckmeyer.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I'm super excited about this project and thrilled to be part of the subcommittee. You know, everyone talks about our Sharp Park area as this great opportunity and the future possible downtown of Pacifica. But the truth is, it's already a huge magnet as a recreation center and location. Our pier is constantly in use, and it's important that we protect that infrastructure and the city infrastructure like the road and the sewer lines and all of our utilities, our homes, our businesses, the golf course. It's all connected, and it's a really vibrant, important area now. It's a historic area now, but doing this project is going to help, along with all the work we've been doing on the Sharp Park specific plan, the general plan update, and we're going to be moving all of these things and pulling all these threads together in the coming years. So it's a very exciting time, and I'm really, really thrilled to be part of it.
Great, thank you both. Okay, next up here, I'm going to run through some more information about today's meeting. And I did see in the Q&A that Lena might be having some trouble. I hope you can hear me now, Lena, or we're on it to help make sure you can hear me moving forward here, all of the presenters moving forward. So let's move into objectives, first things first, for today's meeting. So what do we hope to accomplish in the next hour and a half or so? First is to provide a project overview and updates since the September kickoff community workshop. Next is to provide an overview and share methodology on the project's multi-hazard risk assessment. So for those of you who were able to participate in the kickoff workshop, you might remember some discussion around the existing conditions analysis. And that was kind of the first technical task of the project. Now we're moving into the multi-hazard risk assessment. So tonight, the team will be introducing and providing an overview of that task, including the methodology on the types of risks and how they plan to analyze, how they are analyzing those. Lastly, the final objective here is to solicit participant input that will inform the identification of project alternatives and share priorities and concerns related to the current seawall and project area. So hopefully there's lots of opportunity for Q&A and public comment tonight to hear your questions and your comments that will help inform the project moving forward. So to achieve those objectives, we've laid out the following agenda, which is really in three chunks, for lack of a better word. We're going to start first with the overview presentation on the project. Then we'll have a Q&A session after that. Then we'll move into the multi-hazard risk assessment presentation, and then have a Q&A session after that. And then the third piece there will be public comment at the end of the meeting. Two things to note there. I'll wrap up next steps prior to the start of public comment. So if you would like to leave at that point from the meeting, you'll hear the next steps. Also, the meeting will end after public comment adjourns. So once everyone has their chance to provide 2 minutes of public comment, that's when the meeting will end. And that's why you see that the space there between 7:30 and 8 o'clock will that we might go past 7:30 if public comment is still going. So one little caveat there. Next up are some ground rules. And so as a facilitator, I like to bring in some ground rules to every meeting. So we're all working together to have a productive and efficient conversation. I'll need help keeping all of us on time, of course. So our ground rules, we ask that you please honor the agenda, participate actively and respectfully, work to understand various perspectives, focus comments and speak concisely, and speak in order. I'll be minding the queue, and I'll do my best as hands go up or as questions come in to take those as they come in. So how to participate in today's meeting? There are a few different opportunities here. First, you might notice by now that all of the attendees are muted. That is because with close to 40 folks on the line, it helps to cut down on background noise to keep the majority of people on mute during the meeting. So thank you for that. When we move into the Q&A sessions after the project overview presentation and after the multi-hazard risk assessment, there's a couple different ways to participate. One, if you would like to share your question out loud and speak, you can raise your hand, and there should be an icon or in the there should be an icon where you can indicate and raise your hand. If you are just dialed in, you can dial *9, and that will raise your hand in the meeting room. So we will know that you have a question or comment that you'd like to share out loud, unmuted. And so then when it is your time time in the queue to ask your question or share your comment, I'll unmute you, you'll ask your question or comment and then go back on mute. If you would like to have your question read aloud or would rather type in your question, you can do so in the Q&A pod. I'm seeing folks already doing that. And how that will work is time permitting, we are going to start with all of the raised hands first. So we're going to start with folks who have their hands raised, go through those questions and comments, and then time permitting, move to questions that come in the Q&A chat. There is a chance that the project team might be able to respond to questions by typing in responses in the Q&A pod. Also, if any questions that we don't get to today will be captured in a workshop summary and shared on the project website, which I shared in the Q&A, but it also should be at the bottom of each of these slides. It's cityofpacifica.org/beach resiliency. Okay, I think those are the key things for how to participate. And I know that was a lot and maybe a little confusing. So I'll share that a couple times once we get, once we get to the Q&A portions of the meeting. Now for public comment, again, I'll go over this right before public comment as well, but that will run similarly to the Q&A sessions. If you would like to provide public comment, you'll raise your hand in the Zoom meeting room here, and that will establish our queue. Once it is your time in the queue to provide public comment, we'll unmute you, and there will be a little clock, a little timer of 2 minutes up on the screen, and we'll also be taking notes to make sure we accurately capture your comments, and then you'll go back on mute after the 2 minutes. Okay. Just a couple more things. A post-meeting survey, it will be available after, it'll be available now. We're going to share it in the chat actually, but it will automatically pop up after you exit the meeting as well. It will just take a few minutes to fill out, and it's a great way to get your initial reactions right after the meeting of any feedback that you have that could be applied to future workshops. So again, we'll share the link now if you would like to have that up during the workshop, but it'll also pop up after. And we thank you in advance for taking you a few minutes to complete that survey and provide additional input through it. Last two things, for technical assistance, you'll see in the chat, Christian already shared his contact information. My colleague, Christian Mendez, is our tech support tonight. So feel free to email him or indicate in the Q&A pod that you are having any technical issues, and Christian will be here to help us out. Lastly, we will be conducting a few polls throughout the workshop tonight. Those of you who joined us in September will remember a few polls that we did. The polls tonight will be multiple choice, and I just wanted to remind folks that the polls are meant to be informal and to get top of mind initial kind of gut reactions. It will not be formal comment in any way, and all responses will be anonymous. Okay, any questions? I'm not seeing any in the Q&A pod, but feel free at any time. I didn't mention this earlier, but feel free at any time to submit a question in the Q&A pod in case you're worried you might forget it or want to say it as it comes to you. Feel free to use the Q&A pod throughout tonight's workshop. All right, I think I turn it over next. I think we're ready to move into our project overview section, and I'll turn it over to Ryan Marquez with the City of Pacifica.
Thanks, Kelsey. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Marquez. I'm an engineer with the Public Works Department here in the City of Pacifica, and I'm acting as the project manager. I just wanted to note that my contact information, including my email, is on the project webpage. And so if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me through that avenue, and I'm happy to set up either a phone call or a Zoom call with you as well, if that's a preferred platform. So with that, I'd like to move into an overview of the project and kind of recap of some of the stuff that we've done so far. So just as a quick reminder, the project area that we're looking at is, of course, along the western edge of the historic West Sharp Park neighborhood. It spans from a bit north of Paloma Avenue along the western side of Beach Boulevard to just south of Clarendon Road. And the project team has broken down this stretch into 4 different segments because they have differing characteristics with them. And those 4 segments are the north wall, starting up at Paloma, going to the pier wall system, which is at the easterly portion of the pier, and the south wall, which is, of course, south of the pier, and then what we're calling the South Gap or the Clarendon Gap, which is a gap in shore armoring just south of the south wall, in between the south wall and the Sharp Park levee. And moving on, just some brief history and background into the area. The pier was built first in 1973 as a conduit for treated wastewater effluent coming from the then wastewater recycling facility that was located on Beach Boulevard. That has since been abandoned, but of course the pier is still used by Pacificans and many visitors alike. In 1984, the northern wall was built, and then 3 years later, in 1987, the south wall was built. Over the course of the lifespan of the north wall, it has seen multiple failures. The 2 major failures occurred in 2001, as well as more recently in 2016. In addition to these failures, there's been localized flooding and property damage from wave overtopping. Additionally, as I mentioned, in the south of the south wall, there is the gap in protection that it leaves the area vulnerable. And of course, there is a concern of sea level rise and the effects of it on the area. So kind of when you put all those together, the failures, the end of the lifespan of these structures, you really get a clear project need, and it makes it very clear why the city is looking into this very important area today. So just going through some project goals. So the project would like to replace the current seawall and outdated infrastructure, to build climate resilience into one of the most vulnerable segments of the city's shoreline. Would like to improve public access and the use of Beach Boulevard Promenade. Really, overall, it's trying to create a multi-benefit solution to protect public infrastructure, recreational activities, homes, businesses, and the community at large from further effects of coastal erosion. So just a quick recap of how this project is broken down right now, as well as some of the engagement that have happened and are upcoming. So just a reminder, this is broken down into 3 different phases as of right now. We're about midway through phase 1, which is the preliminary planning and feasibility phase. There are 3 main tasks underneath this first phase, and those are the existing conditions review, which is just as it sounds, it's looking into the existing conditions of the area. And the second task is the multi-hazard risk assessment, which we're covering a bit tonight, which is looking into the future risks of the area. And we're going to use those 2 tasks to inform our alternative formulation and ranking. And so essentially, we're going to lay out viable project alternatives and look at what can be done in the area to complete the project goals. And once an identified preferred alternative is decided upon, that will be moved into phase 2, where full design and permitting will be completed. And then, of course, phase 3 will be construction. So all the while during this first phase, we have 4 community workshops planned with, of course, the kickoff workshop happening in September, the second workshop, which is this evening, covering the multi-hazard risk assessment. And then we plan on having 2 more workshops kind of covering the alternative design development in January and March. As well as, meanwhile, we plan on continuing online engagement and information sharing through sharing project documents, as well as, for example, the existing condition survey that I'll review in a few minutes, but we plan on continuing that throughout the life of the project. So just to review, we went over this last time. This is kind of breaking down the exchange of information / input as we go through this project. So for the existing conditions task of phase 1, we shared the information on existing conditions review and including approach and status. Then that was the last presentation. We collected input on how stakeholders interact with and use the project area and what they most value about it. And we also collected input on from stakeholders on problem areas as they exist today. So in the second task of the multi-hazard risk assessment, which is tonight, or the workshop tonight, but the task that we're currently in, we plan on sharing the approach for studying hazards and how the risk assessment will inform the alternatives development. And we also plan on collecting input on priorities and concerns as they relate to data presented this evening and gather initial input on potential project alternatives at a conceptual level. So in the third task of this first phase, we plan to share information on each alternative under consideration and the criteria that will be used to identify the preferred alternative. Plan to solicit stakeholder feedback on the project features and amenities toolbox, which will inform the project alternatives and will also feed into the project design when we move into phase 2. And we'll lastly collect stakeholder input on criteria and the alternatives under consideration. So just to kind of recap some of the key feedback we heard on September 24th during that kickoff workshop, something that was repeated a lot from attendees was the concern on project funding and cost to Pacificans. And I'm going to touch on that briefly in a second. But also we heard the need to align this project with other city planning efforts, such as the local coastal land use plan, as well as the Sharp Park specific plan, and to ensure that this project is in line with regulatory agencies' expectations. Additionally, we heard that this project will be serving as a catalyst for commercial development and private investment in Pacifica. And the last key feedback we heard was the concern in the project's construction timeline. So, and whether if phasing to address different priority areas or to mitigate some of the construction impacts of the area was possible. So a big feedback that we got last time was, well, how are we going to fund this project? And as City Manager Woodhouse pointed out last time and has said before, we believe it's going to be a combination of various different sources that are going to need to fund this project. However, we just wanted to bring it up this evening to let everybody know that we have a lot of different opportunities that we're keeping in mind as we move through this first phase. We don't really have a cost estimate for, because we don't have a preferred alternative, of course. But once we do, we'll be able to understand a bit more what type of funding opportunities will apply to this project and pursue them. Because of course, the work that we're doing now is going to feed into ensuring, grant applications and other funding sources see this as a viable and good project. And so I just wanted to show you guys this table of some of the local, state, and federal possible funding sources that we're keeping an eye on for right now. And of course, this list is ongoing. So I wanted to go over some key feedback we heard on the existing condition online survey. So the purpose of this survey was to gain a better understanding of stakeholder interests, priorities, and concerns related to the project area. So the survey was open for about 3 weeks, and it closed with a total of 191 total respondents with 830 individual map responses. So you can see all the map responses on the right-hand side of the slides here. Respondents were kind of asked to look at areas where places they visit, areas that need improvement, areas of concern, and of course, where they park. And so some of the key themes we heard were that respondents were expressing a great appreciation for living in Pacifica, including its natural beauty, as well as its unique connection to the Pacific Ocean. We heard the acknowledgement of sea level rise being a significant short and long-term issue for the city. We also heard that there was concern with the north wall given the past failures and the type of wall that is in place. There was also clusters of feedback focused around the pier area, discussing possibly looking into replacing it. And there was also some clusters of feedback in support with closing the gap along the South Gap, the Clarendon Gap, in between the South Wall and the Sharp Park Levee. The most commonly expressed concern was actually for protection and safety of people, homes, and businesses. Many respondents also voiced concern with the project funding, particularly if public funds would be used for private property protection. And so the survey responses really indicated a range of perspectives in envisioning Pacifica's future. So many residents and visitors appreciated kind of the non-commercial and seamless connection to the ocean that the seawall and the promenade provides. And others really stressed the need for significant infrastructure updates, particularly for safety reasons and as a means to kind of modernize the areas. There was also a question on how folks would like to be engaged, and some of the more common responses were through virtual engagement strategies, whether that be a comment portal, additional surveys, or social media interaction. We also heard to continue convening existing meetings or possibly looking into adding project-specific meetings. And then we also lastly heard that residents want to see draft documents as they become available, and we will be posting those on the website as they become available.
Great, thanks, Ryan. I think we might be ready for our first poll question. We're about to move into the Q&A session. So if you do have a question and you would like to share your question and we will unmute you, feel free to raise your hand at this point. We'll start up our queue, or feel free to type your question into the Q&A pod. But our first poll question here, if we want to have it pop up, is just to kind of gauge how comfortable do you feel after about what was just discussed. So kind of the level of understanding with the project overview that Ryan just covered. So the options here, I'm not following. I need more information. I'll ask a question. I feel okay, but have some questions. I feel good so far, and I'm ready to move to the next section. I'll give just a few more seconds really to fill this out. We're seeing no one has said that they're not following, so that's a good sign. About 14% are saying, I feel okay, but I have some questions. And about 86 are saying, I feel good and I'm ready to move on here. So I'll give just a couple more seconds to kind of final call for poll votes. All right, I think we can end the poll. So we're ending at about the 14%, about 4 folks feel okay, have a few questions, and 86% are feeling good so far, so we can keep moving. Great, thanks everyone. I don't see any hands up yet. There is one question in the Q&A pod from S. Thompson Drake asking, are there any updates on seawall permanent? I think that the permanent might be in quotes. Yes, he says permanent's meant to be in quotes.
Perhaps we could ask the user to ask that live. I just like some clarification.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I don't know if S. Thompson Drake, I don't know if I unmute you, would you mind sharing your question and providing a bit more context? I will, let's see. Okay, I think you're able to unmute and share now if you would like. Are you there? Can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Suzanne.
Oh, Suzanne, perfect.
Hi, thanks. Sorry. So I just thank you for the recap of those former questions that were on the survey and feedback that you received. That being said, so you've received all this feedback. Are there any answers for those questions that seemingly were out there? Number one, the gentleman just mentioned the gap between Clarendon at Beach Boulevard, the resolution clearing that up. Certainly the permanency or resilience to the existing seawall. Number two. Number three, certainly north of, on Beach Boulevard, the north end, and the permanency of that seawall. So that gentleman had just mentioned all 3 of those as feedback of concerns. Are there any resolutions to those items? That's all I have. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'll go ahead and jump in here. So there was a lot there. Those are all kind of areas that we're keying in and focusing on in this phase of work to identify solutions to. So we haven't identified a preferred solution to any of those. However, we want to basically, with that feedback, acknowledge that we hear those concerns and that we're definitely looking into those areas. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, I am mindful of our time. I don't see other hands raised. Feel free to type in more questions, but I'm going to keep us moving and move us into the multi-hazard risk assessment presentation. So I will turn it over and introduce Paul Henderson and Brian Leslie with GHD to go over this next segment of our workshop tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelsey. So yeah, I'm Paul Henderson. I'm a civil engineer with GHD, and I'm the project manager from the consultant side for this project. As Ryan mentioned earlier, the project is split into 3 phases, and we're currently in phase 1. And working through the multi-hazard risk assessment task, which we also refer to as the MHRA, or sometimes simply risk assessment. And just to give you a quick run through the MHRA and what Brian, Leslie and I will be discussing. First up, we'll be talking about how the MHRA fits into the project and touch on the design alternatives. And then Brian will discuss the coastal engineering aspects of the MHRA, such as the wave overtopping, flooding, coastal erosion, and I'll then come back and discuss the earthquakes, utilities, economic considerations, environmental considerations, and finally the outputs of the MHRA and how we'll use this information. Before we get started, I want to just wanted to explain the concept of a return period for a hazard. So this concept comes up a couple of times in the presentation. So, for example, we have the concept of a 100-year storm, or a return period of 1 in 100 years. This doesn't mean that if we had this event happened 100 years ago, it's going to happen again this year. It means that in any given year, there's a 1 in 100 chance of this event occurring, or a 1% chance. Or for a 1 in 25-year return period, it's a 4% chance in any given year of it occurring. So moving on to our alternatives. So what I'm showing on the left, we're working through the MHRA, and our findings will be used to inform our design alternatives, which are on the right. And we'll be looking at them in the next task, which is the alternatives analysis. Now, there's a little more nuance to this, but in the interest of time in the workshop, I've basically separated the risk assessment into two parts. The first part, identifying the hazards and the consequences now and in the future. So if this project does not happen, like in the case that the existing wall failed completely and it was not rebuilt, what distance would the coastal erosion move the beach inland, say in 25 years or in 50 years? The first part of the risk assessment can be tricky to consider, because we know that maintenance would continue on the wall and it's not going to fall into the ocean tomorrow, but we do need to know what would happen if the shoreline was not protected. What utilities would be lost, what properties would be lost, where and when we would need to reroute the water main that runs down Beach Boulevard, that kind of thing. And the second part is quantifying the risks, like what is the significant wave height of a 50-year storm event, and what volume of water does that wave dump behind the wall, or what depth of scour on the beach can we expect. This all leads to design criteria for our design alternatives, and I'll quickly touch on the alternatives that we'll be looking at. And now these are not set in stone, but these are the alternatives that we're considering at this time. So we have no project, or do nothing. We have beach nourishment, which is like pumping sand onto the beach, sand retention structures such as groins or a replacement seawall or a rock revetment. And or we could have a combination of those different alternatives, such as a wall with a rock revetment in front, similar to what we have today. And before I move on, I'd like to point out that in a lot of our technical presentation, we will be using a seawall as an example. This is simply because this is something that we're all familiar with, and I do want to point out that we are giving all the other alternatives serious consideration. So yeah, just wanted to make that clear, that a seawall is not a foregone conclusion. And later in the presentation, I'll discuss how the risk assessment results will be used with our design alternatives. But before that, I'll hand you over to Brian, a coastal scientist, to discuss some of the coastal hazards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul. So I'll be going over coastal hazards. And coastal hazards in the project area consist of both erosion and flooding hazards. Flooding hazards are currently experienced when large waves occur during periods of high tide. I just muted me somehow. Can you hear me, Kelsey? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you all right.
All right. So these large, long period waves result in localized increases in water levels. And both those waves setting up water in the surf zone and then through. Okay, I'm keep getting muted. I guess there's a reverb, big echo.
You sound good now, but I could tell you went out for a moment. You got muted.
Interesting. How is now?
It sounds good now. We'll let you know. If
Oh.
Oh, now you're muted. Sorry, Brian.
Sorry, everybody. I was on. Does that work? I think the other platform was throwing us off the chat platform.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Okay. Anyways, these large waves with long periods result in these localized increases in water levels. And that water sets up in the surf zone and individual waves run up the shoreline and sometimes overtop structures such as seawalls, like in the picture shown. As part of our assessment, we'll be characterizing run-up and overtopping and the existing and future condition during these extreme events. Since we don't anticipate being able to completely eliminate wave overtopping during all potential extreme events, like Paul was speaking to these return periods and like the 1 in 100-year event, we don't anticipate being able to, there's always a bigger event out there. We don't anticipate being able to design to prevent any water from going over top the wall. So since we can't do that, we'll be looking at how the existing stormwater system on the promenade and Beach Boulevard can cope with these wave overtopping events, or how that whether that system can cope with those events or how it can be improved to accommodate them. The other main hazard we'll be talking about is the potential for shoreline and bluff erosion. And since the backshore in our project area is armored, we'll be looking at the hypothetical situation of how the bluff would erode if a wall were not in place. We'll be looking at how the beach might evolve over time to understand also the potential for scour fronting our structure. So how deep the beach might recede at the toe of our structure. And this will help design the foundation of a new shoreline protection device. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in addition to looking at existing coastal hazards, we're looking at these future conditions with sea level rise. We're using the best available science for the region and being consistent with policy guidance from the California Coastal Commission. Specifically, we're looking at 2, 3.5, and 7 feet of sea level rise. These rates are intended to cover a range of potential emission and risk aversion scenarios per the guidance over the project's design life. The project's design life is assumed to be 50 years, but we're analyzing out to year 2100 to analyze the potential impacts through the end of the century to analyze the effective design life of the project. Next slide. So as I introduced, we're looking at flood risk through the use of a series of empirical equations developed by Eurotop. Version 2, which was developed in 2018. The methods developed by Eurotop represent the best available science on wave run-up and overtopping for a variety of shorelines and shoreline protection devices. These equations are widely used for coastal engineering projects in the US and internationally since this manual was developed. The equations use a number of input variables, and they predict the amount of run-up and overtopping for a given set of oceanographic conditions. We're using these equations alongside a review of past events to validate the accuracy of the model before we go ahead and predict future events. I'll talk about that in a little more detail in the next few slides. So the outputs from these equations are in terms of total water levels and the rates of overtop water during extreme events. The total water level is the height of the wave run-up along a shoreline or a structure, and that's illustrated in the picture on the right. The overtopping is the amount of water that makes it over the structure and can result in this localized or nuisance flooding, like this picture on the left of Beach Boulevard. The overtopping equations can provide the rate of overtopping per linear foot of shoreline, both in terms of mean and the maximum rate during a storm event. And then we can go ahead and take that rate and convert it to a volume of overtopped water over that event's duration, that wave event. In the next slide, you'll see a series of plots that show the various oceanographic parameters that go into this model. And we're looking at past events, as I mentioned, to validate the findings from our equations. We're focused in on, we want to make sure these results are grounded in reality before we start plugging in these future scenarios and these more extreme events. We're looking at these 4 events in particular that occurred during the 2015-2016 winter. These events ultimately led to a failure of the North Wall and were well documented by the city and various resources online like YouTube. So these kind of anecdotal observations, pictures, videos provide useful data points to verify our results against. In the next slide, you'll see one event in December 2015 that we're kind of honing in on for overtopping. During that event, we had a lot of overtopping along the North Wall. The oceanographic conditions during that event were a large, long period wave occurring coincident with a relatively high tide. Through our analysis, we found this event had about a 10-year return period. The total water levels during this event reached 40 feet per the equations, and the mean overtopping rate per foot of seawall was about 0.5 cubic feet per second per linear foot of wall. So for perspective on that volume, the half cubic foot is about equivalent to 4 gallons, which is almost equivalent to the Home Depot Let's Do This shopping bucket, which is 5 gallons. So what we're talking about here during this event was about a Home Depot bucket worth of water going over about every linear foot of wall per second during the peak of that event. On the next slide, you'll see some outputs from our model. These plots show some of the seawall height versus overtopping rates. Shown on the vertical axis are various wall heights ranging from 24 to 34 feet in height. The existing wall ranges in elevation from north to south, but is about 25.5 feet on average. And that elevation is shown by that gray dashed line at about the lower third. On the x-axis is a predicted mean overtopping rate in cubic feet per second per linear foot. And that ranges from 1 to 5 on this plot. Hold on to that 0.5 cubic foot per second rate that occurred during the 2015 event for context. And basically what you'll see with these plots is that the lower the seawall, the higher the overtopping amount, which is kind of a common sense kind of finding. But as you can see with various rates of sea level rise, these overtopping conditions get worse. In the next slide, you'll see a hypothetical that we've laid out to kind of demonstrate how we're going to use these data. So in the existing conditions, which is the left plot, raising the wall to 30 feet or about 5 feet above the existing wall would reduce the overtopping rate to near 0 during a 60-year return period event. With 2 feet of sea level rise, the right plot, we'll need to raise the wall to 33 feet or 8 feet above the existing wall to provide that same level of protection. Now, I want to just note that it's not common or our intent to design the wall to a 0 level of overtopping. I'm just showing these scenarios as like simple numbers to help illustrate how we're going to use these outputs. So we understand there are trade-offs between the level of protection against provided against other things like community character, coastal views, aesthetics. We're going to use these data to help optimize the level of protection provided and try to balance these other factors that we know are important to the community. And finally, I want to touch on how we're analyzing erosion risk. Next slide, please. We're essentially looking at, as Paul mentioned, how the shoreline would erode if the seawall wasn't there. We're using this to help define what's at stake, thus define the importance for the project. The loosely consolidated materials that make up Pacifica's bluffs and are highly erodible. The San Francisco Regional Sediment Management Plan found that the bluffs make up the highest erosion rates within the littoral cell, for context. So we're using a background erosion rate of 1.6 feet per year from a recent study conducted by Gary Griggs. We're using this rate to predict how the beach and bluff would erode without sea level rise. We're also using the USGS's Cosmos data to account for how the bluff erosion is going to potentially accelerate with sea level rise. So I think you'll see we have a lot of valuable tools to help characterize coastal hazards and risks within our project area. I'm going to hand it back to Paul to speak to some of the other multi-hazard risk assessment hazards.
Thank you, Brian. So yeah, I'll start off with earthquake risk. So as Californians, you're all very familiar with the hazards associated with earthquakes, such as strong ground shaking, ground surface rupture, which is basically where the ground surface is torn open or displaced vertically. We have liquefaction. So this is when the ground shakes, and some types of soils, when they're saturated with water, they'll lose their strength and they'll behave like a fluid. Slope failure of the coastal bluff. Unfortunately, the bluff is relatively low at this location, but collapse caused by shaking is still something that we need to consider in our designs. And so these are the hazards, but what is the risk of those hazards occurring at this project site? So the earthquake risk is the probability of a particular level of damage or harm occurring in a certain magnitude earthquake. So we designed a seawall for a particular peak ground acceleration in the horizontal direction, say 0.5 Gs. What would be the probability of an earthquake producing 0.5 G or greater in a given year? Or what is the probability that a wall could fail in a given year? And what risk are we willing to accept? Is it a 1% chance, a 0.01% chance, a 2% chance? This is something that we're looking at, and we'll work through this with the city as we develop our criteria. And this shouldn't be surprising to people who live in the Bay Area, but our findings so far indicate that it is likely that a large earthquake of magnitude 6.7 or greater will occur during the design life of a new structure at the site. And in terms of the fault lines shown in the image on the right, the project is located in between the infamous San Andreas fault and the San Gregorio fault. Scientists have predicted a 72% chance of a major earthquake occurring in the next 30 years. And in any one of those 30 years, we can expect a 6.2% chance of a 6.7 magnitude or greater earthquake to occur on the San Andreas fault, and then a 2.6% chance of that same earthquake on the San Gregorio fault. Sorry, same magnitude earthquake. And just for some perspective of a 6.7 magnitude earthquake, most people will be familiar with the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, which was a magnitude 6.9 earthquake, and there was obviously some significant damage caused by that quake. Now I'm going to move on to utility risk. So the utility risk is largely driven by the coastal hazards that Brian was talking about, such as the flooding and coastal erosion. There are other risks to the utilities, such as earthquakes, but earthquake risk is present whether we protect the coastline or not. So we won't be looking too hard at that for utility risk. So I've been given utility information from all of the owners and operators in the area, and found that we have drinking water from the North Coast County Water District, stormwater drainage from the city, sewers from the city. We have both gravity and force main. We have gas from PG&E. We have electricity from PG&E, and communications from AT&T. In the utility risk, we need to determine what the effect of the loss of the service will have. For example, if you remember Brian's coastal erosion slide, the map showed the beach had moved in around 370 feet by the year 2100. So this means, for example, that the sewer pressure main can no longer carry wastewater along Beach Boulevard, because Beach Boulevard no longer exists, and we would need to reroute that main. And the rerouting of a sewer main might require new pump stations or moving other utilities to avoid clashes, or maybe even property acquisition. It could also mean replacing lines along the side street so that they drain by gravity towards the new water main alignment. So as our utility engineers work through the utility risk, we're able to determine the best course of action at a concept level to ensure that supply is maintained to the homes and businesses in the area. And at this stage, we're thinking that the drinking water main and the sewer main will be of the highest concern. However, all of the utilities on Beach Boulevard would need to be relocated if the shoreline was to move landward. We'll also be considering the cost of the loss of Beach Boulevard itself, like the roadway and the walkway that we have now. Would we need to install cul-de-sacs or things like that? And all of these utility relocations and loss of infrastructure will obviously have a cost, which we're considering in the economic risk. And that brings me to my next slide, economic risk. Excuse me. So as part of the alternatives analysis, which is our next task in the project, we'll be completing a benefit cost analysis, or a BCA, or multiple BCAs for each of the alternatives. And we'll be using that to compare the various alternatives that we're assessing. So right now in the risk assessment, we're assessing the potential costs associated with the hazards, and these costs will feed into the BCA in the next task. So in this task, we're not completing a BCA, but we do need to know what form the BCA will take. So I will briefly touch on the BCA because I know the economic side of the project is very important and of particular interest to this audience. So we looked into several different methods, including methods published by FEMA, the US Army Corps of Engineers, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. So very simply, all of these methods are fairly similar for economic analyses, and that is, you look at the project costs and the project benefits and compare them. Essentially, a BCA of greater than 1 has a net benefit, where a BCA of less than 1 has net costs. So obviously our preferred design alternative should have a BCA of at least 1, or 1 or greater. In our review of those three methods of BCA, what we found is that the FEMA guidelines are better suited to hazard mitigation projects with a focus on grey infrastructure. The Army Corps methods, they were developed in the 70s and were initially intended for water resource projects. They have produced additional guidelines, but we do feel that the Army Corps methods, they don't provide the framework for the holistic approach that we want to use to evaluate our alternatives, such as the intangible benefits of recreation and other social benefits that are difficult to put a price on. What stood out to us is the NOAA guidelines, which were developed specifically for coastal communities. While the framework most heavily weighs on protecting the public, it does provide guidelines for evaluating social and environmental benefits. Okay, we'll be providing more information on the BCA methodology in the next public workshop. So we'll get back to the economics involved in this risk assessment that we're working on right now. So I'm showing here on the slide the primary impacts that we're evaluating. And as I mentioned in the last slide, there are a number of utilities that could be impacted by erosion and flooding. We're going to quantify the costs of repairing or replacing those utilities and the cost of not being able to provide those services should the utilities fail, like the cost of rerouting the sewer main, for example. In terms of property, we are assessing property and building values. We're looking into a few different ways of determining these values, and we'll likely combine information from a few different sources, such as publicly available information from Zillow or the Redfern websites, also our subscription service with Parcel Quest, and in some cases we may seek the advice of local real estate professionals who obviously know what's going on in the area. In the scenario where properties will be lost, we'll also evaluate the property tax revenue that the city will lose. For the businesses within the impacted area, we'll be evaluating the cost of loss of business productivity. We'll be considering operation and maintenance costs associated with keeping the existing infrastructure. We'll be estimating the cost of repairs to the existing infrastructure. This will be based on the actual cost of previous repairs and then projected into the future. And an example of this is the 2016 repair shown on the right of the slide, which cost around $580,000. We expect failures like this to continue to happen if the existing wall was to remain. Once again, once we start digging into the benefit cost analysis in the next task, we'll also be evaluating recreation activities such as a day at the beach or environmental benefits. And the NOAA economic framework allows for looking at these intangible benefits in a qualitative way, rather than assigning arbitrary dollar values to something that we really don't know the dollar value of. And this will all be explained in the next workshop. We can move to the next slide, please. So the environmental risks. So through the risk assessment, we're looking at basically at 3 different environmental risk categories. The marine biology, so in the ocean and the intertidal zone. Terrestrial biology, which is on the land, and recreation and visual impacts. So that's how people use the area. I'll give you a very summarised version of what our environmental scientists have found so far, and just to provide you some context of these findings, we would anticipate that the project would generally be confined to the footprint of the existing protection structures that we have now, except perhaps in the case of if we were to build rock groins out off the beach. So even though the project will generally be confined to the current footprint, we have conducted preliminary environmental studies outside of the footprint, which included in the ocean and the golf course. So these preliminary studies do give us an idea of what is and what isn't viable in terms of environmental and permitting. With the marine biology, we've found that the area supports a diverse marine community. Any work here on this project would have potential impacts, but we believe the impact can be easily mitigated. And it is worth noting that a new development does not necessarily have a negative impact. We could be removing a dilapidated infrastructure and replacing with a more ecologically conscious alternative. With the terrestrial biology, noting that the footprint is likely to be confined to the existing area with minimal impact on special status species such as the red-legged frogs and garter snakes. And something that's very important to note is the Laguna Salada wetland complex, which is inside the golf course. It supports the highest concentration of special status wetland wildlife species on the San Francisco Peninsula coast. So preventing saltwater intrusion through the South Gap would be of great benefit to protect the future of the wetland, and part of our project is to close the gap, as Ryan mentioned earlier. So in terms of recreation and visual, so if the existing wall was to fail, we would obviously lose the beach access and our great walkway system along the promenade, which we're taking this into consideration. And obviously, the new project provides some really good opportunities in terms of recreation and visual, and we'll be looking for community feedback and ideas on these opportunities in future workshops. Okay, and so now in the next slide, I'm going to talk to you about. So we're going through the multi-hazard risk assessment, and this is what we're going to do with or an example of what we're going to do with the outputs. So some of these outputs will be used to inform design criteria. Some will be used in the benefit cost analyses. Some will be used in other aspects of our comparison of alternatives in the next tasks. And again, I'm using a seawall just as an example. We're certainly looking at the other alternatives. So some of the coastal factors that drive design criteria, things like the height of the wall, which would be driven by the tolerable discharge or what volume of water coming over the wall we're willing to accept, as Brian touched on. or the depth of the wall. Do we need to account for significant scour depth in our foundations to prevent the wall overturning, or would we need a rock revetment to limit the scour? We have wave forces, and this will drive structural parameters such as the strength of the wall or the type or material on the facing of the wall. Earthquake hazards will also determine the depth of the foundations and the strength of the wall to resist the lateral acceleration effect on the backfill of the wall and the mass of the wall itself. And of course, liquefaction. So how do we allow for the soil behind the wall? If it is liquefiable, do we remove it and replace it with non-liquefiable material, or do we simply increase the strength of the wall itself to resist the material behind the wall when it turns into a fluid, basically? In terms of utilities, would the footprint of our new structure encroach on the alignment of existing utilities? So do we need to move those utilities? How does the storm drainage pass through the new structure? Things like that. And in terms of economics, what will it cost if we do nothing? How much are we prepared to spend to mitigate the consequences of the hazards? In environmental, how do we protect the existing habitats? What can we do to improve the existing habitats, like environmentally friendly solutions? And in terms of recreation, how can we make the site more accessible to more people, and what amenities can we build to make this a more vibrant and exciting place? How high are we willing to have the wall? You know, we don't want to block out the beautiful views, but we don't want to prevent significant overtopping. So there's a balance there with the wall height. And all of these things we'll be discussing in the next public meeting. We'll be talking about the design alternatives. And so thank you for your time, and I'll pass you back to Kelsey for the next Q&A.
Great, thank you, Paul and Brian. We are ready to move, almost ready to move into our next Q&A. And I know, Susan Wallace, you've had your hand up for a while. Thank you for waiting. We're gonna do 2 more quick polls, and then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A before I'll review next steps, and then we'll move into public comment, if that sounds like a good plan. So let's bring up our second poll. This is similar to the first one. It is, do you understand the approach that will be taken to assess risks in the project area? So based on what we just heard, similar responses. I'm not following, I need more information. I feel okay, but I have some questions. I feel good, and I understand the content shared so far. So I'll give a few moments to respond. This one's looking a little bit closer than the first one, in that between those second 2 options, we have about 9 folks, or 39%, saying I feel okay, but I have some questions, and about 63% saying I feel good and I understand the content, which is a great sign. Final call for poll votes. Get them in if you haven't yet, and we'll close it in just a few moments. I did see one person saying I'm really not following, or a couple people saying I'm not following and I need some more information. So as we move into the Q&A, feel free to share questions, either by raising your hand or by typing the question in the Q&A. Also in the post-meeting survey, which is in the chat and should automatically pop up when you leave, I think there is a field for, what additional questions do you have? So that'll be a great way to add in your questions as well, to, build understanding over what's been covered today and topics that might need to be focused on in the future. Okay, let's close out this poll. Great, thank you everyone. And we'll move into the last one. Now this one's a little bit different. It's still multiple choice, but it's a little bit different. So the team just covered a variety of risks that they are looking into and analyzing for the project. And so the question is, which of the risks discussed is most important to you? And acknowledging that all of these are very important. Again, this is initial gut reaction. What's kind of the first thing that comes to mind that you would like to share with the group here? So I'll give a little bit longer on this one. And then we'll kind of talk through the results before we move to Q&A. Okay, so our options here, hope you all see this, but overtopping and flood risk is coming in with the majority of the votes so far, 50%. Earthquake risk is next with about 5%, one vote so far. Coastal risks has about 12%, utility risk 12%, economic risk 31%, and environmental 33, 31. Those are both, the economic and environmental are kind of toggling between the two. And so overtopping and flood risks are coming up as the majority, but all risks are getting some votes, with the second and third most votes going to economic risk and environmental risk, respectively. So I think that goes to show, again, that how important all of these risks are to understand and fully analyze. And how hard it is to have to make a quick decision. We acknowledge that, and thank you for sharing these results. So we can go ahead and end that poll and share. Great. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I think we'll turn over to Q&A. I think Susan, you took your hand down, so maybe the question passed or was answered during the presentation. So there are a few questions in the chat. So we'll take a couple, and then we'll turn to next steps and Q&A in about, I'll aim for about 7:10, 7:12-ish here. So the first question here from Betsy: can we design for a 500-year or greater event? Someone wants to speak up and take that, whoever wants to take that first.
I'll jump in, and then Brian from GHD can follow up. The short answer is going to be yes, of course we can design for it, but there's impacts that come with with designing for that type of event. So it may not be in the realm of the realistic possibilities to design for such an event.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so it's going to be a balance, as we're Paul and I were kind of speaking to, and others, that there's these different the aesthetics, visual, these views, community character, all these different things come into play when we think about what we can design to. And so these are all the things we're looking at within the different heights or the different level of protection we're providing will be balanced against these different types of criteria.
Great, thank you, Ryan and Brian. Okay, next question. And so this topic's come up a couple times. I think we've answered a few questions, but just to clarify, why is loss of beach use / recreation not quantified? Is Pacifica economically sustainable if there are no beaches to come to? I think there's a question of where does recreation fit into the multi-hazard risk assessment?
I can jump on that one.
Sure.
So the recreation and environmental side of things will be quantified, just not in a dollar value, because it's so difficult to put a dollar value on these aspects that nobody will be happy with the dollar value that we put on them. So there's in the NOAA framework for the BCA, there are methods to quantify the qualitative parts of those aspects of the environmental and the social and other aspects. And in terms of the second part of the question about the city being viable if the beach resources were not available, I have to defer to Ryan or someone at the city for that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we're doing the extent of the analysis on that yet. Of course, here in Pacifica, we love our beaches and we love the recreation, and that's why we're here to ensure continued usage of the area.
Great. Thank you both. So I actually see Tony. Tony has his hand up. So Tony, if you're ready now, I will allow you to talk and ask your question live, and then time permitting, there are a couple more questions in the Q&A pod. So Tony, I'm going to allow you to talk here, and I'm mute. Oh, I think I just muted you at the same time. Keep doing the same thing. Okay. Tony, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. I have a few comments. I'll try to make them short. But the analysis that it was kind of discouraging to hear Paul Henderson talk about the fact that the seawall isn't a foregone conclusion. One of the things not in the analysis that I heard is the reputation of Pacifica by letting homes get wiped out and people become financially ruined. We were in national news in 2016. I think if the seawall started eroding the streets and things happened, there'd be a loss of market value to homes within the city, which would consequently result in loss of revenue. So because it's difficult to quantify doesn't mean it shouldn't be quantified, because zero is certainly not the right quantification for that. So I would hope that that would be put into the analysis as part of it. And also I want to say that, the seawall works. I live here, and overtopping, all of these issues, I've never had a major damage from overtopping in 16 years. I've never even had a minor damage. It's a minor thing. Having the seawall there just to prevent the erosion of the utilities of the streets and the properties and keep the beach access is all we really need. And we have a retaining wall that exceeded its useful life. It's built. It's like having a car for 10 years. If you keep it for 20 years, there's going to be some problems. The seawall had an estimated useful life, which is we've gone beyond on the north end of the wall. It's a building block retaining wall, which is not really a seawall. And yet still, it handles most of the impact. I think just getting an estimate to get a seawall and trying to raise the money might be the best approach to preserving our city.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you for your comments. Okay. Oh, and I see, and I think this might be, the Zoom login here, but we have another hand raised, and it's from Pop Pop and Grammy. So I'll let them introduce themselves. I'm sure this is their Zoom name, so they can chat with grandchildren. So here we go. Allowed to talk here. Okay. I think you might. Let me try and make sure you're unmuted here. Are you there? Can we hear you? I think you're unmuted if you're able to test the audio here. Okay, we aren't hearing you in case you are trying to speak up. Okay, I think I might keep moving us forward, and we can try this again in public comment if you would like to share your question there, or in the Q&A pod if you don't mind typing in your question or comment. Sorry for the technical trouble there. Okay, so I am mindful of the time, but I want to take in just a couple more questions, and then we'll move into public comment. Actually, the next question up was from Jeff Goulet, and I see you have your hand up, Jeff. So I'll read your question, but then I'll turn it over to you. Oh wait, you have your hand down, so maybe you were just flagging this question. The hands are too fast for me. So the question, Jeff, that you submitted in the Q&A pod was, how will this project be within the same footprint, but still extend to close the South Gap? If anyone from the project team wants to take this, and then I think I'll ask one more question, then we'll move to public comment.
Yes, I can take that one. So when I made that comment, that was more related to the environmental. So we're talking about the snakes and frogs type comment. Of course, we will be assessing the gap. That's definitely part of the project. I simply meant that the project won't be. It's generally will remain in the existing footprint and won't be affecting wildlife, far away from the project. So hopefully I didn't confuse people there. We're certainly assessing the gap, if that was the point for that question.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, I'm going to take one more question here and then wrap up with next steps and then move to public comment. So this last question here comes from George. Does your top include the effects of a reflective wave as it interacts with the incident wave, exacerbating the problem in front of the structure? George gets it. He's asking a technical question here.
Yeah, thanks for that, George. To my knowledge, it doesn't consider a reflective wave. It considers what is referred to as dynamic water levels. So wave setup within the nearshore and surf zone is what's included. So it's the still water, which is your tides, plus the dynamic water levels, which is everything to do with your waves. If you could have to, the setup of water along the coastline due to these long period waves, as well as other kind of non-tidal residual type of effects. And yeah, so those are the different components that feed in, as well as the different oceanographic parameters we spoke to. And then also these different physical parameters like the toe of the slope of the wall and the crest and the freeboard, things like that.
Great, thanks, Brian. All right, so I'm going to move us into next steps and then into public comment. So if Matt, if you don't mind jumping a couple slides to next steps. And I can tee this up and then Ryan, feel free to jump in if I missed anything. But next steps from today, we encourage everyone to please visit the project website. The link is here and we'll put it in the chat as well. You can find the summary from the September 24th workshop, as well as the recording of that meeting. To complete the post-meeting survey, that is available on the website. And as I said, it should automatically pop up once you leave the meeting today as well. And on the website, there's also a place to sign up for our mailing list, our email list. If you haven't done so already, feel free to fill that out so you are up to date on upcoming meetings and project developments. The next community workshop, our third workshop, will take place in January. And as Paul mentioned, we'll focus more on the alternative design development and on other project updates. It will also include some discussion on amenities that you currently use and hope will continue to be available along within the project area. So we have a question to kind of keep in mind and come into the next workshop having thought about and with some ideas that you can share with the project team. The question is, what amenities do you use and appreciate along Beach Boulevard, and would you like to see discussed at the next workshop? So I think that there's a question in the post-meeting survey around this as well. And then come into the next workshop with some feedback on amenities as well. Ryan, did I miss anything there?
Oh, you're spot on. Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out. Of course, we're not ending. We're moving on to public comment, but I just wanted to reiterate again, my contact information's on the project webpage. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any comments that you'd like to submit or questions or concerns.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. All right. So public comment. I know I've said this a few different times tonight, but in order to participate in public comment, feel free to raise your hand, hit the hand raise icon. If you are just dialed in but are interested in providing public comment, you can dial *9 and that should raise your hand for us, and we'll unmute you when it's your time in the queue. So I'm already seeing some names go up. How this will work is I'll give heads up. So I'll say, as I'm seeing here now, Christine is up first, followed by Kimberly, and then we're going to try to make sure that Pop and Grammy can unmute and make a public comment here. So I'll kind of tee up and give heads up when your turn's coming up, so you're ready to go. And then we'll have a timer up for 2 minutes, as well as Matt will be taking some notes live to make sure we're accurately capturing your comments. I hope that all sounds clear. Feel free to share any questions in the Q&A if anyone's confused about the public comment. So I think if we are ready, let's get our screen ready to go. And then Christine will be up first, followed by Kimberly. All right. Okay, Christine, I'm going to make it so you can. I think I accidentally unmuted you again. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for the presentation tonight and all the technical information that we're following very closely in our household here. And I know you're mostly looking at engineering solutions, but I wanted to take a step back and ask if you had looked at any nature-based mitigation. I was just reading from a website from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, and I'm just going to read you a portion of that. It says, climate change impacts require an evaluation of infrastructure solutions, a reevaluation of infrastructure solutions. Studies suggest coastal nature-based solutions can mitigate flood and storm damage more effectively than gray infrastructure alone and are more resilient. For these reasons, coastal states are investing in natural infrastructure solution. The restoration of wetlands, mangroves, marshes, and oyster reefs, and the installation of living shorelines, plants, and natural elements designed to stabilize and protect coastlines help reduce wave impacts during storms. 15 feet of marsh can absorb up to 50% of incoming wave energy. By contrast, gray infrastructure redirects rather than dissipates wave energy. Furthermore, waves can overtop jetties, bulkheads, levees, and seawalls. So flood protection is only provided to a certain peak wave height. A study conducted by the University of North Carolina found living shorelines prevented erosions just as well as bulkheads, but required no repairs after hurricanes, whereas 75% of bulkheads needed repairs. After Hurricane Florence hit, the seawalls there experienced significant erosion and damage, while living shorelines, such as the Beaufort living shoreline, composed of oyster reef and marsh, fared much better. These reefs and marshes basically naturally grow in height with sea level change, and so repairs aren't needed as much. So I'm hoping that you would consider that. Thank you.
I'm muted, of course, not setting a good precedent here. Thank you, Christine. I don't think you heard me say thank you. And next up is Kimberly Williams, followed by Pop Pop and Grammy. Hopefully we can make sure we can hear them. Okay, Kimberly, let's make sure you can unmute yourself there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much for this presentation. It's been really great. I really appreciate it. I did see the previous presentation, and the information is very interesting. And I appreciate that this project is one that presents a lot of challenges. And so I like that everybody is collaborating to work on it together to come to a good solution. The thing I would like to say is that I would like to see more alternatives. It seems like beach protection and recreation are listed last in all of the things that you have listed here in this presentation and in some of the previous materials. And I think recreation and beach use should be singled out as its own category and looked at. And there are ways to quantify that economically now. And I think that you should look at that because it does play a significant part in Pacifica's economic sustainability. So that's 22 feet high with a substantial amount of riprap at the toe, and it is failing. And yes, it is an old seawall. If you look back at photos of this area way back, you'll see long shoreline of beach, and we don't have that anymore, and we're losing what we have. And so I'd like to see us look at alternatives like Christine mentioned, to take this opportunity to return it to a more living shoreline where we can protect our beaches and we can all enjoy them. I think a larger seawall, which seems to be indicated, would not actually make things safe, and there's good reason to believe it would fail over time in a quicker timing. And then the other thing I'd like to say is that, you know, beach resiliency is kind of a misnomer here, because resiliency has to do with a living shoreline. It has to do with natural barriers and protecting the beach. And when we lose the beach, we kind of lose Pacifica. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Okay, next up is Pop Pop and Grammy, and then followed by Jeff Goulet here. Okay, I'll lower Kimberly's hand, and okay. Are you there? It looks like you're unmuted. It's not coming through. Let's try this again. Can you hear us now? Or can we hear you now? Shoot, I'm so sorry. We're having trouble connecting here. Christian, can you help? Can you reach out, and I'll move on. I'll move us on to Jeff, but I really do want to make sure now, since it's the second time, I want to make sure that your comments are included. So if Christian, if you don't mind reaching out and trying to help them, or if you can reach out to Christian to make sure we can get you connected, that would be great. Okay, so we'll come back there. Okay, so next up, I'll turn it to Jeff.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for this meeting. It's very instructive, and it's good to have the community be part of this decision-making process. I appreciate that. I feel that we really do need to replace the seawall with something that will last at least 50 years. As previous speakers had talked about a living shoreline, I don't know how you can make a living shoreline that would work in 16 feet wide area that we have of where this current seawall is. There is no beach there. It's not like we're protecting that beach. What we're doing is we're trying to protect the infrastructure and the homes and the properties and businesses that live there from wave overtyping. I do feel that it happens irregularly. And I think having a seawall that will survive for the next 50 years is the paramount thing that we need to do there. There's no way that we could do something on the way of a living shoreline or a natural solution without doing managed retreat. And we've pretty much established that the city is not going to do managed retreat, and the citizens don't want it. And it's not viable here. So those are my comments. And then I do have one question. I don't know if you can answer it, but I understand that out of the product of this this study is that we're going to have a single preferred alternative. And I was wondering who develops that alternative? Who is it that comes up with that? And then is that the end all be all? That's the one thing that we are going to be doing? Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. To get to your question, we are all going to be together formulating the alternative development during this next phase of work. So the project teams can identify viable alternatives, and we're going to identify criteria to grade those alternatives on, and we're going to share those criteria with you at the next workshop, so it's transparent on how we're grading these and how the preferred alternative is selected. I just want to note that the preferred alternative could be a variety of different treatments combined into kind of one, so to speak, project. So it could be phased over time. Don't think of it as a singular, one end all be all solution.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, next up is Tom Thompson, followed by Suzanne Thompson-Drake. So Tom Thompson, you're up.
Does that work?
Yes, that works.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Tom Thompson, and I've been a Sharp Park taxpayer and property owner for over 30 years. I love what's planned for Sharp Park, the hotel, the retail, the housing, palmetto upgrades, outside investment. But this is never going to happen, though, without a plan and a commitment to a seawall to protect Beach Boulevard infrastructure. Nobody's going to invest in a hotel, which is critical to the city's financial future, or other mixed-use projects without a commitment to a modern seawall. A seawall is also by far the most cost-effective thing we can do to protect existing homes, businesses, and infrastructure. And it's really a no-brainer, frankly. But I have two questions. So what can Pacifica do to expedite getting a new seawall built and making it happen, and not just keep studying it and talking about it? And the second question, how long does the city anticipate it will take until we can start building the seawall that we obviously need? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I could try to answer some of those questions right now. As far as trying to help expedite this, this project needs to follow a thorough process where we look at the best available science and we look at it thoroughly to ensure that we're coming up with the best alternative and the best solution for the city. So just be patient with us as we move through this. We are working fairly fast, and we understand the immediacy and the need for this project, but we need to make sure that we're thorough and that the work we're doing is correct and thorough, really. And then to touch on your question regarding the anticipation of timeline on construction, we don't have that yet because we don't know what our preferred alternative is. So it's difficult to assess how long out construction can be without knowing exactly what the project's going to entail. So we're working forward, we're moving forward this winter on trying to figure all these out. So appreciate your patience and your comments and coming out this evening.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, next up is Suzanne, followed by Brian O'Flynn. So Suzanne Thompson-Drake, you're up next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. First thing, I don't know Tom Thompson as far as relations, so we'll get that out of the way. The second thing is that you had a couple of comments earlier regarding some sort of natural habitat, some sort of reeds or wetlands. I think that those folks do deserve an answer to that question, because to me, that sounds like we remove unless we can plant like wetlands in the ocean, it sounds to me like managed retreat. So I think that they deserve clarification, as well as the rest of us deserve clarification on that being explored. Number one. Number two, managed retreat is absolutely a non-negotiable situation. Right now, we have economic viability for this city that is in peril. Right now, there is a tremendous amount of traffic going to Half Moon Bay, spending a ton of dough in Half Moon Bay. They have brand new, beautiful resources that are truly, truly based on increased tax revenue. You go into Daly City, great buildings, great opportunities. You go into South San Francisco, great buildings, great opportunities. Pacifica has been absolutely the cornerstone of an eyesore in the Bay Area. We have had tremendous amount of economic problems in development, housing, and so forth. We really need to shore up the seawall in order to make that happen. And I appreciate your comments regarding managed retreat as well as the viability of the seawall. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right.
I'll just jump in there really quickly. Thanks, Suzanne, for your comments. And we hear you, and we heard the living shoreline comments, and we want you to know that the project team is going to be assessing all the viable alternatives and seeing what is possible in this area. So there may need to be a certain set of criteria met to make the living shoreline possible in this area. And I'll turn it over to, it looks like Brian at GHD to kind of expand on that a bit more.
Yep, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, this is a really, I mean, we love living shorelines, and we're looking for opportunities to incorporate green where we can on this project. It is just a really dynamic coastline with a lot of wave energy. So, you know, things like oyster reefs are not a perfect fit, but things like a dune system or use of like coarser materials like a cobble could be. So we're looking at those types of options and their viability. Excuse me, not necessarily a living shoreline, but on the green spectrum, are really looking at beach nourishment and the viability of that as well. So we are looking at these options.
Great, thank you both. Okay, so a couple things. I see a few, 4 more hands raised. Brian O'Flynn is next, followed by Cindy Abbott, and then Tony Sadek. Sadek, I'm probably pronouncing your last name wrong, Tony, you'll have to help me out. And then Pop Up and Grammy, I accidentally lowered your hand, but I know that your hand is still up. A couple options, if you can hear me, but we shared some tech support in the chat, but in case you're not seeing that, I did want to share that if you're dialed in separately and would like to make public comment, and if you are dialed in separately from your webinar name, you'll dial *9, and that'll raise your hand, and hopefully we can unmute that specific line in case that's the issue we're running into. The other thing might just be to have you dial in separately in case you haven't done so already. The dial in, I'll say it out loud, is 669-900-9128. And so you'll dial in that. And then the meeting ID is 940-6910-8603. I know that was a lot. I don't know if that is helpful, but let's try that. That information is also on the website, cityofpacifica.org/beach resiliency, hoping to find a way to connect you in here so we can hear your comment. Okay, next up is Brian O'Flynn.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, Brian O'Flynn. I've been a resident and taxpayer and property owner on Beach Boulevard for 20 years. I've done a couple of projects there as well. Be doing right across from the pier, starting construction this coming year, where we did study the seawall to the north and to the south at one of California's top consultants, do some work on analyzing the seawall. Also, he was also involved in the project at the very far north end of Beach Boulevard, which was up for serious seawall study. We've discussed some very cost-effective means of preserving the existing revetment or seawall. It's really not it's more of a gravity block system, but that gravity block system can be maintained and then augmented by driving piles or drilling piles down to bedrock behind the seawall, and then tying them in with dead men across Beach Boulevard to preserve the infrastructure, and also to preserve all of Salado Beach neighborhood. So it can be done very cost effectively. Ryan, I'll try and get a local engineer to come up with a proposal of how to do it. It could be done in sections very cost effectively as they can move down the seawall itself. I think Salado Beach, which is actually the real historic name for that part of Shark Park, which was in the south, more towards the golf course. So Salado Beach is one of the first communities there on the coast, and I think it's very important that we preserve that historic heritage character. And I think preserving the seawall can be done cost effectively, and I'd be happy to lend a hand whenever and if possible. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. Okay, I think me listing out the phone number might have actually helped. And I think Pop and Grammy are on. So I think we'll have, we're gonna do Cindy and then Tony, because I changed up the order there, just giving time to get everyone connected. So let's go to Cindy and then Tony, and then we'll do Pop, and then I see Summer Lee at the end here. Okay, so next up is Cindy. Hang on one second, Cindy. Okay. Okay, Cindy, are you there?
Hi, yes, thanks, Kelsey. I'd like to echo what we've heard as far as looking at alternatives. While I understand maybe the desire isn't there, but anyone who isn't frightened about an 8-foot height increase that would be required to hold back the natural waves that are occurring in the ocean, I think really needs to consider what that would mean to the area. West Shark Park and Pacifica has never been about huge buildings or a built environment. The character of our community is the environment that connects us between the hills and the ocean. So I think we really need to think about alternatives to this. And maybe what Brian suggested, you know, a more easy and relaxed way of repairing the existing seawall is an option, as well as considering moving the infrastructure under that street that I've talked about before. Why not upgrade our infrastructure that goes back to the late 1950s and move it inward so it's safe for decades and decades and decades to come and updated? I'm a little concerned about beach nourishment. It's a process that never ends. It's very expensive and has many challenges to it. So sounds like a great thing, but it's not. And I just want to remind people that there used to be a large sandy beach there, and it would be amazing to have it back. I'm curious how many people are on the call because this is an important conversation, and I don't think too many people are here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay.
Thanks for the comments, Cindy. And it looks like as of right now, we have about 34 attendees, and we were at 40 earlier.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move to Tony, and then to Pop and Grammy, and then to Summer Lee. And those are the final 3 commenters I see. So if you have a public comment, you know, raise your hand now so we can take stock of where we are. Okay, Tony, you're up next.
Great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, an important point that I want to make is that this seawall along Sharp Park by the promenade was there. So the people that moved there saw a city seawall and kind of trusted that the city would take care of it and protect their homes. People built their lives there knowing that there was a seawall there. They invested, they have their families, their children. So I'm wondering, in the analysis, I've heard a lot about financial numbers. I've heard about loss of revenue, replacement of utilities versus the cost of a seawall and the maintenance of a seawall. Has there been any consideration to the human factor of people and families that have built their lives along this shore and, you know, trusted that the city would take care of it? You know, is there any consideration to them beyond a number in the analysis and weigh in the decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's a great question. So I think the way that we cannot necessarily quantify it in the scenario that we're doing, that doesn't mean that we can't qualify it and talk about it and understand that it's there. And I don't think that's lost on anybody on this project team, that we have folks and residents who live in the area and have roots in the area. So I appreciate the comment.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Tony. Okay, so next up is Pop Pop and Grammy, and I'm going to unmute your actual phone number, the line that you called on now. I'm attempting to unmute here. Is there a way you can unmute your line? Do you see a place to unmute your line? Shoot. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought we had our breakthrough, but we're still having trouble unmuting. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm mindful of the time and the two other folks waiting, so we'll try this one more time, and I'm so sorry that we're having issues. And now that we have your phone number too, if we can reach out after and also have, you know, set up a time to chat afterwards in case we aren't able to get you connected today. My apologies that that we're running into issues here. Okay. So the last two names I see here are Summer Lee and Kathleen Courtney with their hands up. So Summer Lee, I think you're up. You'll be up next.
Hi there. I'm another Pacifican who would just like to see more alternatives considered and studied. I'm new to the seawall conversation, but I just, you know, just reading in the news, there are other places that are confronting these issues, and there are innovations that are being made all the time. I think this is very limited to the seawall discussion, which I feel is not doing a service to all of Pacifica. And with that, I just have a question that's probably rhetorical, but it's just a matter of time. This whole area is going to be subsumed. I mean, sea level rise is not going away. So how much does Pacifica want to pay? All of Pacifica wants to pay to just preserve this for a very short time. Thank you.
Thanks, Summer. All right. Okay. So I think next up is Kathleen Courtney. Okay. Kathleen. You there, Kathleen?
I am here. Thank you. I just wanted to come out publicly to say that after listening to you guys, to the feedback, there are so many great comments, and that I can hear that the priority would be the seawall in whatever type that is, but hopefully one that is getting into construction soon, because this is something that is just getting worse, and we cannot lose anymore. We cannot be in the news anymore because of an infrastructure problem as dramatic and as expensive as that. So I love what one gentleman said. Pardon me. I'm so sorry that before we can get into big investments here with other companies, whether they be hotels, et cetera, I wouldn't be a hotel here if there wasn't a plan in place that was actually going, not just being talked about. So my question is, do we have any idea how long the current wall can last under the circumstances that we've seen over the last, let's say, 25 years? Is there any concept of that? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, just to jump in on that, our last meeting, we did discuss a bit of the existing conditions, including a structural analysis of both walls as well as the pure wall structure. They had differing life range left with them. And it's really dependent on the type of winters and storms that they receive. However, they ranged from 5 to, I believe, 20 years, depending on the section that we were looking at. So that is driving us to look at an immediate replacement at this point.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so I see Susan Wallace raised her hand. And then I think that is it for public comment. I don't see any other hands raised. So kind of final call if you do have. Oh, I see pop up and Grammy joined again. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. We'll try one more time to make sure to see if we can get them connected. But next up is Susan. We'll try pop up and Grammy, and then unless there's any more public comment, we'll wrap us up. Okay, Susan, you're up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Are you in communication with San Francisco regarding the Sharp Park berm? My understanding is that the Coastal Commission tasked them with repairing and doing repairs to that berm. And the primary concern was protecting, of course, the golf course, but also protecting the infrastructure and the homes that are in Sharp Park. So are you in is there a collaboration with any of this conversation? So that is my question.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, good question. We are absolutely in contact with San Francisco Parks and Recs, who oversee the berm and, of course, the golf course. And we are bringing them along, inviting them to be a part of this process, as well as collaborate with us throughout. So we appreciate the question and understood.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, we're gonna try this one final time and to see if we can get you connected here, Pop and Grammy. So I'm allowing to talk and unmute. Are you there? Can you unmute your computer if you're on your computer? You can unmute your computer if you're on the phone. It's *6. You don't see your phone number anymore, so I'm not sure. Or you can use the Q&A pod to let me know. Can you hear me? Shoot, I'm not seeing connection. Okay, I'm so sorry. We're running into this issue where we can't unmute you. It looks like your microphone's unmuted. Do you want to test the audio before we wrap up here? Shoot, we're not hearing you if you're trying. If you can't hear me and can use the chat, can access the chat, if you could leave your contact information in the chat and we can get in touch offline. I'm so sorry we're we're having trouble getting you connected. I feel, and I wanted to know your name. We had your grandparents' names, and we wanted to hear your names and your comments. So my apologies, and apologies to anyone else if you ran into any technical issues tonight. But I think I don't see any other hands raised for public comment. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up. And thank you all. Ryan said this right before public comment, but thank you all for joining tonight and for all your great feedback. And the team looks forward to seeing you at the next workshop in January, and wishing you all very happy holidays, and hope everyone and your loved ones stay healthy. So thanks, everyone.